you think happens when you die in a dream? It's time to find out.
Black Phone 2 is a new horror film that came out this weekend. The film is directed by Scott Derrickson, and this film is, of course, a sequel follow-up to The Black Phone, which came out in 2022. That film was such a damn good movie that when I heard they were making a brand new Black Phone film, they were bringing back Scott Derrickson as the director, and they were bringing back Ethan Hawke as the grabber. Well, I got all kinds of excited, and I had to put this movie on my top 10 most anticipated movie list of 2025. So I went into the theater on opening night, sat down, and watched The Black Phone 2, and as the credits rolled, I did have to ask myself if this movie was completely necessary.
Necessary? Is it necessary for me to drink my own urine?
Probably not.
No, but I do it anyway because it's sterile and I like the taste.
Okay.
So with that said, let's do the review for Black Phone 2.
Here we go.
That is one big pile of shit.
No, I shot him. Bullets in the fall killed him.
So other than bringing back Ethan Hawke as the grabber, the film would also bring back Mason Thames as the character of Finney and bring back Madeline McGraw as the character of Gwen. Now, Finney and Gwen, of course, are brother and sister. In the first film, Finney was taken by the grabber, locked in the grabber's basement, and while the majority of the grabber was grounded in reality, there was also a supernatural element to that first film because there was a black phone on the wall of that basement, and the different victims that the grabber had previously killed would call that black phone to help Finney ultimately defeat the grabber. And while that was going on with his character, Gwen was on the outside looking for her brother, but she was also having these sort of nightmare visions where she would see Finney in that basement and she would try to help the police locate where her brother was. And again, of course, that movie ended with the grabber definitively dying by the hands of Finney. He would get his neck snapped, and that's the end of the story. Well, that's not entirely the case because as we've seen so many times in the past in different horror franchises, sometimes death is only the beginning, because now that the human form of the grabber is dead, there's now a more supernatural version of the grabber that can visit Gwen in those nightmare visions that she's continuing to have. So the movie opens up a couple of years after the events of that first film, and while the film still focuses on Finney and what he went through, the movie more focuses this time around on Gwen and her story. Because while Finney defeated the grabber and seems to have that in the past, well, Gwen is constantly having these nightmare visions, sometimes of her mother at an old winter camp. And one thing leads to another, and both her and Finney, trying to investigate why she's having these nightmare visions, decide to go to that winter camp to sign up to work for it. But when they get there, it's the middle of a blizzard. It's basically shut down. There's no campers. There's only a few of the other camp counselors or the owner that's there. And so they're all snowed in at this winter camp, but that's when it's revealed that the grabber planned this all along, and now they're right where the grabber wants them, secluded from the rest of the world, where the grabber can finally get to them. And that's the best synopsis that I can give you for Black Phone 2. If that sounds like a fun time, well, this film is currently in theaters, and I would definitely recommend you check it out if you enjoyed that first Black Phone movie. Now I am going to get into my positives and my negatives for Black Phone 2 here in a second, but before I do that, if this is the first time you found my channel, well, I would love for you guys to hit that subscribe button, check out all the different content that I have, whether you like movie reviews, Blu-ray talk, or even ranked list videos. I've got a little bit of everything on my channel, and I'd love for you guys to check it out. All right, let's get into my positives and my negatives for Black Phone 2.
Nothing burns like the cold.
My first positive for this movie is the setting or change of scenery that we get in this film. You know, in that first film, you're in a city, the grabber's going door to door, he's taking kids to his basement. It's all stuff we've seen so many times before, and it would have been really easy if they just set it in this city yet again, if you just had this place where the grabber was back in a supernatural way. In fact, when the movie opens, it does spend time in that same place we were already in, where Gwen is having these nightmare visions, and she's actually going to that basement where the black phone was, or is still, but but it's all destroyed now. And so it's really interesting that they decided to take us out of that setting and move us to this winter camp. Because they did that, the movie did feel fresh, and we don't get enough horror films set in the snow, so it was really cool to have this snowy winter camp as the backdrop for this film. My next positive in this movie is going to be the gore and blood that you get along the way throughout this story. Now, you don't get as many kills as I was hoping we were going to get, and that's something we'll get to in my negatives, but I did appreciate all of the goriness that you get throughout this film, whether it's past victims of the grabber that are sort of coming to light through these nightmare visions. There's some pretty gory images there, or it's some of the stuff that the grabber is doing throughout the movie. For instance, the grabber kind of moves through Gwen's dreams. So as Gwen sleeps, he can visit her, and at one point he decides it's time to kill Gwen, and so he hits her with an axe. And it's really cool because in her dream she starts to bleed, but then it shows her sleeping on a bed, and you see this gash open up on her arm, and it's really well done. And I think they did a great job with some of the gore and blood throughout this movie. And that'll lead to my final and biggest positive of this movie, and that is the incredible visuals that we get throughout this movie. Now, I've already talked about the gory visuals, the winter scenery. Those were previous positives. They sort of tie into this, but what I'm specifically talking about here are the nightmare scenes and the look of the grabber. So I'll start with the nightmare scenes because I thought it was so unique the way that they shot those scenes. They shot them with Super 8 cameras. Very gritty, very grainy, but what that did for you, the viewer, was anytime you would see a scene open up in this gritty way, you knew you were in the dream world, the world that the grabber controls. Very much so like Freddy Krueger, but again, just the way they shot it with different cameras so that you, the audience, knew, oh, we're in for the grabber now because we're in this gritty world. And Gwen is basically powerless throughout most of the movie in these dream sequences. And again, just the way they shot those sequences with the Super 8 cameras, making it feel so distinct from the rest of the film. And then when you'd snap out of it, you would actually go back to the regular cameras, everything be glossy and would look great. And again, it's just a great way for you to visually know where we were, whether we were in the dream world or we were in the real world. And the other visual that I really enjoyed in this movie is the look of the grabber. Of course, in the first film, he was flesh and blood, so there's only one way he would look. He would look like a normal human when he had that mask off. But in this film, when the mask gets ripped away, well, it like rips away his flesh at the same time, so it almost looks like a zombie version of the grabber. And then he's got these ice skates made of pure ice that he's skating around on when you're in the final act of this film. Again, his look looked so good throughout this movie. It was a terrifying look to give the grabber, who was already a terrifying character in the first film. That'll do it for my positives. Now we move over to my negatives, and my first negative for this movie is going to be that the runtime of this film at 2 hours almost feel like they're trying to stretch that runtime out at a certain point in this movie, where certain elements of this film start to get repetitive or they start to get boring. And what I mean by that is I love the change of pace, going to a winter camp, changing the scenery up. I did appreciate that, but it does take a good bit of time to get the characters to realize they need to go to that winter camp. And then when they get there, it takes time for them to convince everyone at this winter camp that there's a supernatural version of the grabber that's out to get them. It just takes a lot of time setting up this brand new story, because instead of just, hey, we've got a serial killer that's grabbing kids and go, we've got a serial killer that's dead and now he's grabbing kids, but he's at a winter camp, and so we have to get our main characters there. And again, just the setup for this movie feels like it takes too long. And then there's the dream sequences, which again, I loved the way that they were filmed. I thought they were visually stunning to look at, and every time they came on, I was invested in the movie. But after a while, they started to get repetitive. You had a dream sequence with Gwen, and it would go on just a little too long, and then you'd go back to the characters who are unsure if she's telling the truth, or they're not necessarily believing that the grabber is back, and then we would do it again. And then you'd have the characters not believe if it was real, and then as those dream sequences would go on, Gwen would start to get attacked by the grabber, and then people would start to believe her. Again, all of these elements were good elements, but they just took their time to get where they needed to go. And I'm not saying my attention span is so bad that I couldn't deal with a 2-hour movie, because God knows they make 3 and 4 hour movies now, and I'm grateful for something that is at least at 2 hours. But I think if they had still trimmed this down 15 to 20 minutes, maybe cut some of those dream sequences out, or cut out some of that time at the beginning of the film before they make it to the winter camp, then I think this would have been a more enjoyable experience. It wouldn't have been as boring boring with certain elements of this film. The next negative for this movie is going to be that the emotional beats didn't always work for me. Throughout this film, you've got Finney and Gwen who have a solid relationship, but there's some things they need to iron out, and they iron them out throughout the entire film. Then you've got Gwen and this boy that likes her, and they have to try to work out their feelings for each other. And then you've got these people that are there at the camp that don't believe Gwen, or they think that she might be a demon child, or she has demons in her, and so they have to sort of get them to come around to her. And then there's the element of their alcoholic, abusive father from the first movie, who now is not an alcoholic. He's 3 years sober, and he's trying to iron things out with both Finney and Gwen because he was an abusive, drunk father in the first film, and so he's trying to do better this time around. And I'm not saying that these characters can't have a redemption arc throughout this franchise, but just giving all of them these redemption arcs and these emotional tie-ins together, and then these really cheesy dialogue scenes between the dad, Finney, and Gwen when they're working things out between each other while the grabber is literally still on the loose. There's just so many emotional beats in this film that don't work for me because they feel out of place, and unfortunately that adds to that boring runtime of this film. That'll lead to my next negative and probably the most disappointing element of this film, and that is that the grabber doesn't feel as menacing this time around. The grabber himself is in this weird Freddy Krueger-like state for the entire film, where he can attack Gwen in her dreams. He can come to people through the black phone that's at the winter camp. He can talk to Finney there, but he can't really work outside of that realm until you get towards the end of this film and they just throw everything at the wall, and they're just like, oh, now he can attack people in the real world while he's in his dreamlike state, which doesn't make a lot of sense. He basically becomes Freddy Krueger and the Invisible Man all at one time, because while Gwen's sleeping, he can skate around the ice rink invisible to everyone around him, and he can slash them as he goes around. So again, it just becomes Freddy Krueger and the Invisible Man, and all of that scariness that was built up from the grabber being the serial killer who is grabbing kids, taking them to his basement, killing them, torturing them, all of that serious scariness that's grounded in the real world just seems to go out the window for this supernatural version of the grabber that's basically Freddy Krueger and the Invisible Man all meshed into one. So at the halfway point of this film, he no longer feels scary, or he no longer feels menacing or even intimidating, because these characters know how they need to deal with him. And I have one more reason for the grabber not feeling as menacing or terrifying this time around, but it is a bit of a spoiler, so I'm going to throw a spoiler warning out to you guys right now. If you have not seen The Black Phone 2, this next point is a bit of a spoiler, and that spoiler is that the reason he doesn't feel as terrifying this time around to the viewer is that because he doesn't kill anybody new this time around. Yes, there's previous victims, there's gore from those previous victims, he does slash at people, he does throw people around, so there's gore and blood from that, but he doesn't actually kill anybody at this winter camp. When they first arrive at this winter camp and they're greeted by the owner and they're greeted by the owner's assistant, and then you find out that there's these two somewhat super religious people that are there, you're like, okay, some of these people are going to be killed by the grabber to show how intense he is without actually killing the main characters. But you don't get any of that. In fact, at one point, the owner of this camp is pushed beneath the ice in a scene where he's definitely drowning to death or freezing to death. And in the next scene, they're like, we were able to pull him out. He's still okay, because they needed his character for something at the end of this film. So again, the grabber doesn't feel as terrifying this time around because he doesn't actually have any brand new victims in this film. Everybody that you're introduced to makes it to the end of the movie, and that's disappointing. You wanted some of these people to get killed just to see how intense the grabber is, to really show everybody in this film like, oh, we need to watch out. He just slaughtered this person and they had nothing to do with the main characters. They were just in the way. But there is none of that in the way killing in this movie. It's just the grabber going around scaring people, throwing scary snowballs at the window, but he doesn't really have any effect on these characters in the film. Overall, this wasn't a terrible movie, but it did disappoint me. I wanted so much more out of this film, and unfortunately, it just felt like an unnecessary sequel that tied up loose ends to questions that I didn't have. What happened with the relationship between the kids and their abusive dad? This movie will explain it. I didn't ask. What happened between the grabber and these kids now that the grabber is dead? This movie will explain it, but I didn't ask. And it's just things like that all throughout this film. Yes, visually, this movie looked beautiful. It really did. It was an incredible visual presentation. But past that, when you get into the story of this film, it just feels unnecessary. It feels like a bit of a cash grab. So would I recommend this movie to people? Well, if you're a huge fan of that original Black Phone, if you love the character of the Grabber, or if you're a big fan of Ethan Hawke or the other actors or actresses in this film, then yeah, go check this movie out in theaters. I think you'll enjoy it at least as much as I did. And there is something to say about that beautiful presentation of the nightmare sequences in this film. I think they look great on the big screen. Otherwise, I'd probably recommend you check this one out at home. But guys, those are just my opinions because that's my review for Black Phone 2. Have you guys had a chance to see this film yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts, where we agree or disagree. I love hearing from you guys in that comment section. And finally, guys, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my review for Black Phone 2. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a fun video to make, even though the movie was a bit disappointing, but sometimes that's how it goes. I am looking forward to more October releases, doing reviews for those movies. Like next weekend, we get Shelby Oaks, which is a movie I've been looking forward to for so damn long, and I'm so excited to sit down in a theater and watch that film. But until then, if you want to check out any of the other content on my channel, well, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my 2025 movie reviews right there.